Marcus Chin had always been an early riser, but that Tuesday morning in October felt different from the moment he opened his eyes. The 24-year-old engineering student rolled out of bed at 6:30 a.m., his internal clock as reliable as ever, but something was off. The usual sounds of suburban life were missing. No distant hum of traffic, no neighbor's dog barking, no morning joggers chatting as they passed by his ground-floor apartment window. Instead, an eerie silence blanketed the neighborhood like a thick fog. He shuffled to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding him through his morning routine. Coffee first, always coffee. As the machine gurgled to life, Marcus glanced at his phone, expecting the usual flood of notifications. What he found instead made his blood run cold. Dozens of missed calls from his parents, his sister Emma, and his 12-year-old brother Jake. Text messages filled his screen, each one more frantic than the last. "Where are you? Call me now. Something's wrong with people." The timestamp on the last message from his mother was 3:47 a.m. His hands trembled as he dialed home. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Emma's voice crackled through, barely above a whisper. "Marcus? Oh, thank God, we thought." Her voice cut off, replaced by muffled sounds and what sounded like furniture being moved. "Emma? Emma, what's happening?" he demanded, his voice rising despite himself. "Are Mom and Dad okay? Where's Jake?" "Mom and Dad are." Emma's voice broke. "They're gone, Marcus. They went to help the Johnsons next door last night when we heard screaming. They never came back. Jake and I barricaded ourselves in the upstairs bathroom, but Marcus, there are people outside. They're not people anymore. They're sick or something. They don't respond when we call to them and they just keep trying to get in." Marcus's coffee mug slipped from his hands, shattering against the kitchen floor. The sound seemed to echo in the unnatural quiet of his apartment. "I'm coming to get you," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Stay exactly where you are. Don't open the door for anyone except me." He threw on clothes without thinking, grabbing his keys and wallet. As he reached for the door handle, a shadow moved past his window. Marcus froze, pressing himself against the wall. Through the blinds, he could see a figure stumbling across his lawn. It was Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down, but something was terribly wrong. Her usual neat appearance was disheveled, her clothes torn and stained with something dark. She moved with an unnatural jerky gait, her head tilted at an odd angle. Marcus held his breath as she passed, but she suddenly stopped directly in front of his window. Her head snapped toward the glass with unsettling precision, and for a moment their eyes met. What he saw made his stomach lurch. Her eyes were clouded over, milky white, and her mouth hung open, revealing teeth stained with something he didn't want to identify. She began clawing at the window, her fingernails scraping against the glass with a sound like chalk on a blackboard. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. The scratching continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes before she lost interest and wandered away. Marcus waited another 10 minutes before daring to look outside again. The street was empty, but he could see more figures in the distance, all moving with that same disturbing, unnatural gait. His phone buzzed with another text from Emma. "They're getting louder. I think they know we're here." Marcus's protective instincts, honed by years of looking after his younger siblings, kicked into overdrive. He had to get to them, but he needed a plan. His family lived 15 miles away across town, and if whatever was happening to people was as widespread as it seemed, the roads might not be safe. He moved to his bedroom closet and pulled out his camping gear. If he was going to make this journey, he needed to be prepared. Water bottles, energy bars, his old baseball bat from high school, and a flashlight went into his backpack. As he packed, his mind raced through possible routes to his family's house, trying to remember which streets had the most cover, which neighborhoods might be safest. Another text from Emma arrived. "Jake's scared. He keeps asking for you. Please hurry." Marcus shouldered his pack and took one last look around his apartment. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, as if the world hadn't just turned upside down. He had no idea if he'd ever see this place again, but it didn't matter. Jake and Emma were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. Not today, not ever. Marcus waited until the scratching at his window had been silent for a full hour before he dared to move. His hands shook as he checked his phone one more time. Still no signal from the cell towers. The last text from Emma was timestamped 23 minutes ago. "Getting worse. Can hear them in the house downstairs." His heart clenched. Every minute he delayed could be the difference between finding his siblings alive or arriving too late. He crept to the front door and pressed his ear against the wood. Silence. Taking a deep breath, Marcus slowly turned the deadbolt and eased the door open just enough to peer outside. The street that had been his home for 2 years now looked like a scene from a nightmare. Abandoned cars sat with their doors hanging open, some still running with their headlights cutting through the morning gloom. Papers and debris scattered in the wind, and dark stains marked the asphalt in several places. Marcus stepped outside, his baseball bat gripped tightly in his right hand. The familiar weight of it brought back memories of high school games, when his biggest worry was striking out with bases loaded. Now missing his swing could mean death. He moved carefully along the sidewalk, staying close to the houses where he could duck behind cars or bushes if needed. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of car alarms and what might have been screaming, though he couldn't be sure. 3 blocks from his apartment, Marcus encountered his first real test. A group of 5 figures stood clustered around an overturned pickup truck, their backs to him. At first glance, they looked like people trying to help accident victims, but their movements were all wrong. They swayed slightly, their heads tilted at unnatural angles, and they made soft moaning sounds that raised the hair on his arms. As he watched, one of them turned slightly, and Marcus saw the profile of Mr. Hendricks from the hardware store. Half of the man's face was gone, replaced by raw, exposed flesh and bone. Marcus's stomach lurched, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed to get past them to reach the main road that would take him toward his family's neighborhood. Moving as quietly as possible, he began to circle around the group, using parked cars as cover. He had made it halfway around when his foot caught a discarded aluminum can, sending it skittering across the pavement with a sharp metallic clang. All 5 figures turned toward the sound in perfect unison, their movements eerily synchronized. Marcus found himself staring into the clouded, lifeless eyes of people he had known for years. Mrs. Kim from the flower shop, her usual warm smile replaced by a slack-jawed expression of hunger. The teenage boy who delivered newspapers, his uniform torn and bloodied. They began moving toward him with that same jerky, unnatural gait he had observed from his window. Marcus ran. He had always been a decent runner, but terror gave him speed he never knew he possessed. Behind him, the moaning grew louder, joined by the sound of shuffling feet and what sounded like more voices taking up the call. He zigzagged between abandoned vehicles, his backpack bouncing against his spine with each step. A quick glance over his shoulder showed him that the group had grown. More figures were emerging from houses and side streets, all converging on his position. He ducked into an alley between 2 apartment buildings, pressing himself against the brick wall and trying to control his ragged breathing. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, but then seemed to pass by the alley entrance. Marcus waited, counting his heartbeats, until the moaning faded into the distance. When he finally emerged, the street was empty again, but he had learned something crucial. These things were drawn to sound and they seemed to communicate with each other somehow. The next 2 hours became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Marcus learned to move in short bursts, timing his sprints between cover when the streets were clear. He discovered that the creatures, he couldn't bring himself to think of them as people anymore, were slow but persistent. They didn't tire, didn't give up, and they seemed to remember where they had last heard or seen movement. As he crested a hill that gave him a view of the main highway, Marcus's heart sank. The road was clogged with abandoned vehicles, many of them crashed or overturned. Smoke rose from several locations, and he could see clusters of figures moving between the cars. The highway, which should have been his fastest route to his family, was completely impassable. Marcus pulled out his phone and tried calling Emma again, but the call wouldn't go through. He sent a text instead, "On my way. Road blocked. Taking back routes. Stay hidden." He didn't know if it would reach her, but he had to try. Looking at his map, he identified several residential streets that would take him in the right direction. The journey would take twice as long, but it was his only option. As he prepared to descend into the maze of suburban neighborhoods, Marcus made a promise to himself and to his siblings. No matter what horrors lay ahead, no matter how many of these creatures stood between him and his family, he would find a way to reach them. Jake and Emma were counting on him, and he wouldn't let them down. Marcus had been moving through the residential maze for 3 hours when he heard the gunshot. The sharp crack echoed through the quiet neighborhood, followed immediately by shouting and what sounded like breaking glass. Every instinct told him to avoid the commotion, but the voices were human, the first living people he had encountered since leaving his apartment. After a moment of internal debate, he crept toward the sound, keeping low behind parked cars and overgrown hedges. The scene unfolded 2 blocks away in the parking lot of a small strip mall. A woman in military fatigues was backed against a pharmacy window, swinging what looked like a crowbar at 3 creatures closing in on her. Beside her, a teenager with sandy hair clutched a backpack to his chest, his face pale with terror. The woman moved with trained precision, but Marcus could see she was tiring. One of the creatures had already gotten close enough to tear her sleeve, and dark blood seeped through the torn fabric. Marcus made a split-second decision that would change everything. He charged from his hiding spot, his baseball bat connecting with the skull of the nearest creature with a sickening crunch. The thing dropped instantly, but the sound attracted the attention of the other two. The woman took advantage of the distraction, driving her crowbar through the temple of the second creature while Marcus faced off with the third. This one had been a man in a business suit, though the expensive fabric was now torn and stained with things Marcus didn't want to identify. The creature lunged at him with surprising speed, its fingers, what was left of them, clawing at his jacket. Marcus dodged sideways and brought his bat down in a powerful overhead swing. The creature crumpled, but not before its momentum carried it into Marcus, both of them tumbling to the ground. "Kid, you okay?" The woman's voice was sharp with concern as she helped Marcus to his feet. Up close, he could see she was probably in her late 30s, with short-cropped brown hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her torn sleeve revealed a nasty gash, but she seemed more worried about him than her own injury. "I'm fine," Marcus gasped, checking himself for scratches or bites. "Are you hurt bad?" "Just a scratch. I'm Sarah Mitchell, Army medic." She gestured to the teenager, who had slowly approached them. "This is my son Tommy. We've been trying to reach the evacuation center downtown." "Marcus Chin," he replied, then shook his head grimly. "I just came from that direction. Downtown's completely overrun. The military checkpoint is gone." Tommy's face went even paler. "Mom, if the evacuation center's gone, where are we supposed to go?" Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "We adapt. That's what we do." She turned to Marcus. "You seem to know your way around these things. Where are you headed?" "My siblings are trapped in a house about 8 miles from here. I have to get to them." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing them the map. "I was planning to take these back roads, but I could use help. You seem to know how to handle yourself in a fight." Sarah studied the map, then looked at her son. Tommy was 16, maybe 17, with the soft features of someone who had lived his whole life in peacetime. The events of the past day had clearly shaken him, but there was determination in his eyes that reminded Marcus of his own resolve to save Jake and Emma. 8 miles through zombie-infested suburbs, Sarah mused. "We'll need supplies, and Tommy needs better weapons than that pocket knife." She pointed to a larger building at the end of the strip mall. "Hardware store. If we can get inside, we can arm ourselves properly." The next hour became a crash course in survival tactics. Sarah taught Marcus how to move silently, how to recognize the sounds that meant danger, and most importantly, how to kill the creatures efficiently without making noise. Tommy proved to be a quick learner, though Marcus could see the kid was struggling with the reality of what they were fighting. "They're not people anymore," Sarah explained as they prepared to enter the hardware store. "Whatever caused this, it's destroyed everything that made them human. You have to remember that, or hesitation will get you killed." The hardware store was a maze of aisles filled with potential weapons and tools. They worked quickly, gathering axes, hammers, and rope. Sarah found a nail gun and several boxes of nails, while Tommy selected a lightweight crowbar he could actually swing effectively. Marcus upgraded from his baseball bat to a heavier sledgehammer, the weight feeling reassuring in his hands. As they prepared to leave, Sarah pulled Marcus aside. "Your siblings, how old are they?" 12 and 17. "They're good kids, smart. They've managed to stay hidden this long." Sarah nodded grimly. "Kids adapt faster than adults sometimes. That might be what's kept them alive." She paused, studying his face. "You know this isn't going to be easy. Even if we reach them, even if they're okay, we're looking at a long-term survival situation. The world we knew is gone." Marcus shouldered his pack, checking his new weapons one more time. "I know. But they're my family. I made a promise to keep them safe, and I intend to keep it." He looked at Tommy, who was nervously adjusting his grip on the crowbar. "All of us are going to make it through this. We just have to stick together." The final 2 miles to Marcus's family home felt like the longest journey of his life. As their small group crested the hill overlooking Maple Street, Marcus's heart nearly stopped. The neighborhood he had grown up in, where he had learned to ride a bike and played countless games of street hockey, was now a wasteland. Abandoned cars littered the roads, many with their doors hanging open as if their occupants had fled in panic. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets in houses that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. But it was the sight of his family's 2-story colonial that made Marcus's blood run cold. At least 20 creatures surrounded the house, their decaying forms pressed against the windows and doors. Some clawed mindlessly at the siding, others simply stood swaying in place as if waiting for something. The front door that his father had painted cheerful blue just last spring was now scratched and gouged, barely hanging on its hinges. "Jesus," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "How are we supposed to get through all of them?" Sarah crouched beside Marcus, studying the scene through her binoculars. "The good news is they're focused on the house. That means your siblings are definitely still alive and making enough noise to keep their attention." She passed the binoculars to Marcus. "Look at the upstairs bathroom window." Marcus adjusted the focus and felt a surge of hope. A small piece of white fabric, probably one of Emma's shirts, was tied to the window frame, fluttering in the breeze. It was the signal they had agreed on years ago during their childhood games of hide and seek. It meant they were okay and aware that help was coming. "We need a distraction," Sarah said, her military training evident in her calm assessment. "Something big enough to draw most of them away from the house, but not so close that it puts your siblings in more danger." Marcus studied the layout of the neighborhood, his mind racing. The Morrison house 2 blocks east. It has a swimming pool in the backyard and a wooden deck. If we could start a fire there. "Fire's too unpredictable," Sarah interrupted. "But noise." She pulled a small device from her pack. "Emergency alarm from the hardware store. Battery-powered, loud as hell. We set it off at the Morrison place. Most of these things should follow the sound." Tommy shifted nervously. "What if they don't all go? What if some stay behind?" "Then we handle them quietly," Marcus said, hefting his sledgehammer. "One way or another, I'm getting to Jake and Emma today." The plan was simple but dangerous. Sarah would circle around to the Morrison house and set off the alarm, drawing as many creatures as possible away from Marcus's family home. Tommy would stay hidden at a vantage point to watch for any creatures that might double back. Marcus would use the distraction to reach the house and get his siblings out through the back door. As they moved into position, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Getting scared. They're getting more aggressive. Hurry." His jaw tightened. Every minute counted now. Sarah's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie they had taken from the hardware store. "In position. Give me 2 minutes to get the alarm set up, then watch for my signal." Marcus crouched behind a neighbor's fence, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the creatures would hear it. The wait felt eternal, but finally he saw Sarah's flashlight blink 3 times from the Morrison house. The piercing wail of the emergency alarm cut through the afternoon air like a knife. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The creatures around his family's house turned toward the sound as one, their movements suddenly coordinated and purposeful. Most of them began shambling toward the noise, but Marcus's heart sank as he counted the ones that remained. 7 creatures still lingered around the house, including 2 that blocked the back door. "Now or never," he whispered to himself, then keyed the walkie-talkie. "Going in." Marcus sprinted from his hiding spot, his sledgehammer raised. The first creature didn't even turn before the heavy tool caved in its skull. The second spun toward him, its arms outstretched, but Marcus was already moving. He ducked under its grasping hands and brought the hammer up in a devastating uppercut that nearly separated the thing's head from its shoulders. But the noise had alerted the others. 3 more creatures began converging on his position, their moaning growing louder. Marcus realized with growing horror that the sound might actually call back the ones that had left for the alarm. He reached the back door and pounded on it with his fist. "Emma. Jake. It's Marcus. Open up." The door flew open, revealing Emma's tear-stained face. "Marcus," she sobbed, throwing her arms around him. Behind her, Jake appeared, looking pale but determined. "We have to go now," Marcus said, pulling them both outside. "Stay close to me and don't look back." But as they stepped into the backyard, Marcus realized their escape route was blocked. The creatures were returning, drawn by the sounds of the reunion. They were trapped, with zombies closing in from all sides and nowhere left to run. "The shed," Emma shouted, pointing to their father's old workshop at the far end of the backyard. "Dad reinforced it last summer when he was worried about break-ins." Marcus didn't hesitate. With Jake on one side and Emma on the other, he sprinted toward the small building as the creatures closed in behind them. The shed's heavy wooden door was secured with a padlock, but Marcus's sledgehammer made quick work of it. They tumbled inside just as the first zombie reached the entrance, its rotting fingers scraping against the door as Marcus slammed it shut and threw the internal bolt. "Is everyone okay?" he gasped, quickly checking his siblings for injuries in the dim light filtering through a small window. Jake was shaking but unharmed, while Emma had a small cut on her arm from their desperate flight. "We're fine," Emma said, though her voice trembled. Marcus, Mom and Dad, they really didn't make it back, did they? Marcus pulled both of his siblings close, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. I don't know what happened to them, but right now we need to focus on getting out of here alive. They would want us to survive. The creatures outside had found their hiding spot, and the sound of bodies pressing against the wooden walls was terrifying. But the shed held firm. Their father's carpentry skills had served them well. Marcus's walkie-talkie crackled to life with Sarah's voice. Marcus, we can see you're pinned down. The alarm stopped working and they're all heading back your way. How many? Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. At least 30, maybe more. Tommy and I are going to create another distraction, but you need to be ready to move fast when we do. Marcus surveyed their temporary shelter. His father's tools hung neatly on the walls and boxes of supplies were stacked in the corners. An idea began to form. Emma, remember when Dad was teaching us about his workshop? What did he say about the ventilation system? Emma's eyes widened with understanding. The exhaust fan connects to a vent that opens near the neighbor's fence. We used to joke that it was big enough to crawl through. Perfect. Marcus grabbed a screwdriver from the wall. Help me get this fan cover off. As they worked to remove the vent cover, Jake kept watch at the window. There are more coming, he whispered. I can see them walking down the street. How many more? Marcus asked, not pausing in his work. I don't know, I can't count them all. Jake's voice was small and scared. Marcus, what if we can't get out? What if we're stuck here forever? Marcus stopped working and knelt beside his little brother. Hey, look at me. Remember what I always told you when you were scared of the dark? Jake nodded slowly. That you'd always be there to keep me safe. That's right. And I'm here now, aren't I? We're going to get through this together. Marcus ruffled Jake's hair, the same gesture he'd made 1,000 times before. But I need you to be brave for just a little bit longer, okay? The vent cover finally came loose, revealing a narrow passage that led to the outside. It would be tight, but they could make it through. Marcus's walkie-talkie buzzed again. Marcus, we're in position. When you hear the noise, you'll have maybe 5 minutes before they figure out it's another distraction. Copy that. Emma, you go first, then Jake. I'll be right behind you. Emma squeezed through the vent opening, her voice echoing back to them. I'm through. It opens right next to the Henderson's tool shed. Jake was next, his smaller frame making the passage easier. But as Marcus prepared to follow, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The moaning outside had changed, becoming more urgent and coordinated. Through the small window, he could see the creatures pressing against the shed with renewed vigor, as if they sensed their prey was about to escape. The sound of splintering would fill the air. The door wouldn't hold much longer. Marcus squeezed into the vent just as the shed door gave way behind him. He could hear the creatures pouring into the small space, their frustrated moans echoing through the wooden structure. The vent passage seemed to stretch forever, but finally he emerged into the cool afternoon air where Emma and Jake waited. This way. Emma pointed toward a gap in the fence that led to the street behind their neighborhood. But as they ran toward it, Marcus realized their troubles were far from over. The street beyond was filled with abandoned military vehicles, trucks, Humvees, and even an armored personnel carrier, all sitting empty with their doors hanging open. The evacuation convoy, Marcus breathed, understanding dawning on him. They tried to get people out, but something went wrong. Sarah's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie. Marcus, we've got a problem. The military vehicles, they're not empty. There are soldiers in there, but they're not soldiers anymore. The infection got to them too. Marcus felt his heart sink. If the military had failed, if even trained soldiers couldn't survive whatever had caused this outbreak, what chance did a small group of civilians have? He looked at Jake and Emma, both of whom were looking to him for answers he didn't have. Change of plans, he said into the walkie-talkie. We need to find somewhere else to go. Somewhere far from any populated areas. Where? Sarah asked. Marcus thought of his grandfather's old cabin in the mountains 60 miles away. It was isolated, defensible, and stocked with supplies. I know a place, but it's going to be a long, dangerous journey. The journey to the mountain cabin had stretched into its third day when Sarah began showing the first signs. Marcus noticed it during their morning routine. She moved more slowly, winced when she thought no one was looking, and kept her left arm pressed close to her body. The scratch from their first encounter had seemed minor, just a flesh wound that had stopped bleeding within hours. But now, as they prepared to cross the valley that would take them into the foothills, Marcus realized with growing dread that the wound had never properly healed. Mom, you're walking funny, Tommy said, his voice filled with concern as they packed their makeshift camp. They had spent the night in an abandoned gas station, barricading themselves in the office while creatures wandered the highway outside. "Just stiff from sleeping on the floor," Sarah replied, but Marcus caught the way she avoided her son's eyes. "We should get moving. The longer we stay in one place, the more dangerous it becomes." Marcus had been thinking the same thing but for different reasons. Over the past few days, Sarah had become the backbone of their group. Her military training had saved them countless times. She knew how to read terrain, how to avoid creature patrols, and most importantly, how to keep everyone calm under pressure. Without her, Marcus wasn't sure they would survive the remaining journey to the cabin. As they made their way along a winding mountain road, Emma fell into step beside Marcus. "She's sick, isn't she?" she whispered, glancing ahead to where Sarah was teaching Jake how to read the compass. Marcus nodded grimly. "The scratch is infected. Look at her arm, she's been favoring it more each day." "But infected how?" Emma asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted ahead of them. Sarah had stumbled, dropping her pack and falling to one knee. Tommy rushed to help her up, but she waved him away with more force than necessary. "I'm fine," she insisted, but when she stood, Marcus could see the dark veins that had begun to spread up her arm from the wound's site. The infection was progressing faster than any of them had realized. That evening, as they made camp in a small cave Tommy had spotted, Sarah finally confronted the truth. She waited until Jake was asleep before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, I need to talk to you." Away from the kids. They walked to the mouth of the cave, where Sarah sat heavily on a fallen log. In the moonlight, Marcus could see how pale she had become, how her hands shook slightly as she pulled up her sleeve. The wound was now surrounded by black, web-like veins that pulsed with a sickly rhythm. "How long?" Marcus asked, his throat tight. "Maybe a day, maybe less. I can feel it spreading." Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath. "I need you to promise me something. When I turn, and I will turn, you have to protect Tommy. Don't let him see me like that." Marcus felt like he was drowning. "There has to be something we can do. Maybe if we can get to the cabin faster." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "There's no cure for this, Marcus. We both know that. The best I can do is make sure I don't become a threat to the people I love." The next morning brought their worst nightmare. Sarah woke with a fever that made her delirious, mumbling about past military missions and calling for people who weren't there. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the black veins had spread to her neck and face. Tommy refused to leave her side. "Mom, please, you have to fight this. We need you." But Sarah was beyond hearing. Her breathing became labored, and Marcus realized they were running out of time. The worst part was that Jake and Emma were beginning to understand what was happening. Jake kept asking why Sarah looked so sick, while Emma watched with the knowing expression of someone who had seen too much in too short a time. "We need to move," Marcus said quietly to Tommy. "She wouldn't want us to be here when—" "I'm not leaving her," Tommy said fiercely. "She's my mom." Marcus understood the boy's pain, but he also understood the terrible responsibility that Sarah had placed on him. "She made me promise to keep you safe. All of you. That means making the hard choices." As if summoned by his words, Sarah's eyes snapped open. But they weren't Sarah's eyes anymore. They were the clouded, lifeless eyes of the creatures that had destroyed their world. She sat up with jerky, unnatural movements, her head tilting as she focused on Tommy. "Mom?" Tommy whispered, reaching toward her. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled Tommy back just as Sarah lunged forward, her fingers clawing at the air where her son had been standing. The woman who had saved their lives multiple times, who had become like a second mother to Jake and Emma, was gone. In her place was something that would kill them all without hesitation. "Run," Marcus said, grabbing his pack in Jake's hand. "Everyone run now." Behind them, the thing that had been Sarah Mitchell let out a haunting moan that echoed through the mountains, calling to others of its kind. The price of survival had just become higher than any of them had imagined. The cabin appeared through the pine trees like a mirage after 2 more days of grueling mountain travel. Marcus's grandfather had built it in the 1960s as a hunting retreat, and time had weathered the log walls to a silver gray that blended perfectly with the surrounding forest. Solar panels glinted on the roof, a modern addition his grandfather had installed in his final years, and Marcus could see the small stream that provided fresh water running just beyond the clearing. "Is that it?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. They had been walking for nearly 12 hours, taking turns carrying the few supplies they had managed to salvage after fleeing from Sarah's transformation. "That's it," Marcus confirmed, feeling a surge of relief mixed with grief. His grandfather would have loved to see his family seeking refuge here, but the old man had passed away 2 years ago, leaving Marcus the cabin in his will. He had never imagined he would need it under these circumstances. Tommy hadn't spoken since they left the cave where his mother had turned. The 17-year-old walked like a sleepwalker, mechanically putting one foot in front of the other. Marcus worried about him almost as much as he worried about the creatures they had left behind in the valley. The cabin was exactly as Marcus remembered it, solid, defensible, and stocked with enough non-perishable food to last months. His grandfather had been a believer in preparedness, long before it became fashionable. Cases of canned goods lined the walls, and a well-maintained generator sat in a small shed behind the main building. "Emma, help me check the perimeter," Marcus said, needing to assess their new home's defenses. "Jake, see if you can get the solar panels working." "Tommy?" He paused, unsure how to reach the grieving teenager. "Tommy, why don't you rest for a while?" As they walked around the cabin, Emma finally voiced what they were all thinking. "He blames you, doesn't he? For what happened to Sarah?" Marcus had been dreading this conversation. "Maybe. I don't know if I blame myself. She was already gone, Marcus. What you did, it wasn't Sarah anymore." Emma's voice was fierce with conviction. "You saved his life even if he can't see it right now." They spent the afternoon fortifying their new home. Marcus boarded up the lower windows, leaving only narrow slits for observation. Emma organized their meager supplies while Jake proved surprisingly adept at getting the solar power system operational. Even Tommy eventually joined in, though he worked in silence, methodically reinforcing the cabin's single door with additional lumber. As evening approached, Marcus allowed himself to believe they might actually be safe. The cabin was isolated, easily defensible, and well supplied. They could wait out whatever was happening in the outside world, maybe even establish radio contact with other survivors. That optimism shattered when Jake spotted the figures emerging from the tree line. "Marcus," Jake called from his position at the window. "There are people coming." Marcus grabbed his binoculars and felt his stomach drop. 5 men approached the cabin, but their body language was all wrong. They moved with military precision, but their clothes were mismatched and their weapons were improvised. Most troubling of all, they made no attempt to announce themselves or signal peaceful intentions. "Get away from the windows," Marcus ordered, his voice sharp with authority. Emma grabbed the rifles from the gun cabinet. "Jake, Tommy, get to the back room and stay low." The men stopped just at the edge of the clearing, close enough for Marcus to see their faces through the binoculars. They were lean and hard-looking, with the hollow eyes of people who had done terrible things to survive. The leader, a bearded man with a military-style haircut, pointed at the cabin and said something to his companions that made them spread out in a flanking formation. "Hello, the cabin," the bearded man finally called out. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Marcus didn't believe that for a second. These weren't refugees seeking help. They were predators who had learned to hunt other survivors. He had heard rumors of such groups during their journey, people who took what they wanted from the weak and defenseless. "We don't want any trouble," Marcus called back. "Just keep moving and we'll leave each other alone." The bearded man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Afraid it doesn't work that way, friend? See, this mountain only has so many safe places and we've been watching this cabin for days. Nice solar setup, good water source, plenty of supplies. Problem is, there's only one of you and 5 of us." "You're wrong about that," Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. "And you're wrong if you think we'll just hand over what's ours." "Well then," the man said, his tone turning cold, "I guess we'll have to take it. Boys, we'll give them 1 hour to think it over. If they're not out by then, we do this the hard way." As the men withdrew to set up camp at the tree line, Marcus realized their ordeal was far from over. They had escaped the zombies and found sanctuary, only to face a threat that might be even more dangerous. Other human beings who had abandoned their humanity in the name of survival. Looking at his siblings and Tommy, Marcus knew he would have to find a way to protect them from this new enemy, even if it meant crossing lines he had never imagined he would cross. Marcus spent the hour pacing the cabin like a caged animal, his mind racing through every possible scenario. The hostile survivors had made camp just beyond rifle range, confident in their numerical advantage. Through the binoculars, he could see them passing around a bottle and laughing, treating the standoff like a game. They had no idea what they were dealing with. "Marcus," Emma whispered, joining him at the window. "What are we going to do?" "I'm going to keep my promise," he replied, his voice carrying a steel edge that surprised even him. "No one is taking this place from us and no one is hurting you, Jake or Tommy. Not after everything we've been through. Tommy finally spoke for the first time since losing his mother. There are 5 of them and only one of you. The math doesn't work. Marcus turned to look at the teenager, seeing something different in his eyes, not just grief anymore, but a cold determination that reminded him of Sarah. You're right. That's why I'm not fighting fair. The plan that formed in Marcus's mind was born from desperation and 3 days of watching how the infected creatures behaved. He had noticed patterns, how they were drawn to noise, how they followed the scent of blood, and most importantly, how they didn't distinguish between hostile survivors and innocent ones. As darkness fell, Marcus made his preparations. He gathered every can of food with a pull tab from their supplies, along with the emergency flares his grandfather had stored in the cabin. Emma helped him rig motion-activated noisemakers using fishing line and empty cans, while Jake positioned mirrors to create sight lines around the cabin's perimeter. I need you 3 to stay in the back room, Marcus told them as he prepared for what might be his final gambit. No matter what you hear out there, don't come out until I give the all clear. What if something happens to you? Jake asked, his 12-year-old voice cracking with fear. Marcus knelt down to look his little brother in the eyes. Remember what I taught you about the radio? If I don't come back, you get on the emergency channel and keep calling until someone answers. Emma knows how to use the weapons, and Tommy. Marcus looked at the teenager. Your mom trained you well. Take care of them. Tommy nodded slowly. What are you planning to do? Something your mother would have understood, Marcus replied. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules of the game. At exactly midnight, Marcus slipped out of the cabin through the root cellar entrance his grandfather had dug decades earlier. The tunnel emerged 50 yards away, hidden among the pine trees. From there, he began the most dangerous journey of his life. The hostile survivors had posted sentries, but they were watching the cabin, not the forest behind them. Marcus moved like a ghost through the trees, using every skill Sarah had taught him about silent movement. His destination was the valley below, where they had encountered scattered groups of infected during their ascent to the cabin. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Marcus used the emergency flares to create noise and light, drawing the attention of every creature within miles. Then he began his retreat up the mountain, leaving a trail of open food cans and activated noisemakers, a breadcrumb path that led directly to the hostile survivors' camp. The first screams came just after 2 a.m. Marcus watched from his hidden position as chaos erupted in the camp below. The infected had followed his trail, emerging from the darkness in numbers that even surprised him. The hostile survivors fought bravely, but they had been caught completely off guard, their weapons scattered and their formation broken. The bearded leader was the last to fall, his final words a curse that echoed through the mountains before being cut short by the creatures that had once been his neighbors, his friends, maybe even his family. Marcus waited until dawn to return to the cabin, making sure the infected had dispersed back into the forest. When he finally emerged from the root cellar, he found Emma, Jake, and Tommy waiting for him with a mixture of relief and awe. Is it over? Emma asked. It's over, Marcus confirmed, pulling all 3 of them into a fierce embrace. We're safe now. In the weeks that followed, they established routines that slowly began to feel like a new kind of normal. Marcus taught Jake how to hunt and fish, while Emma mastered the cabin's solar power system. Tommy gradually came out of his shell, sharing stories about his mother and helping to train the others in the survival skills she had taught him. 3 months later, as Marcus sat on the cabin's porch watching Jake practice his archery while Emma and Tommy tended to their small garden, he reflected on the promise he had made that terrifying morning when the world changed forever. He had sworn to keep his siblings safe no matter the cost. Looking at their small family, because that's what Tommy had become, another brother who had chosen to stay with them, Marcus knew he had kept that promise. They had lost everything, but they had found something too, the unbreakable bond of people who had survived the impossible together. The world might never be the same, but as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. Marcus had learned that being a protector meant more than just fighting monsters. It meant creating a place where hope could survive, even in the darkest of times. The little ones were safe. His promise was fulfilled.